Hi there, welcome to a podcast brought to you by the Rights of the Child Commission and UNICEF. I am here with Miss Loria-Mae, our child protection specialist at UNICEF Guyana and Suriname. Welcome, Miss Loria-Mae.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So today we'll be diving into questions, and I'm sure the viewers have answers or needs answers about child sexual abuse, an understanding of what exactly it is. So my first question to you is, what is considered child sexual abuse, and why is awareness so important?
Thanks for asking that very important question. Now, at UNICEF, we tend to see child sexual abuse as the actual or threatened physical intrusion of a sexual nature of anyone under the age of 18. So, why under the age of 18? Of course, because a child is seen as anyone under the age of 18. And then, in terms of awareness, why is awareness important? We find that a lot of times when dealing with children, they may not necessarily know that they are a victim of sexual abuse. And if they do not know that they are a victim of sexual abuse, how could you report it? How could you know that this is something that is wrong and needs to be addressed? So awareness is important in terms of making the child sensitized on what abuse is, and also in terms of the perpetrators. The perpetrators should also know that this is something that should not be tolerated and that there are consequences. So it is essential that not only the child is aware of what sexual abuse is, but also the perpetrators, because of course, as I said, if we're not aware, it is possible that the abuse could continue.
Yes, and ignorance is not an excuse when it comes to the law. You mentioned that children, to be classified a child, you have to be under the age of 18. Why do you think our policymakers and lawmakers place that cap on children, the age limit?
Well, that goes back way to the 1980s when the Convention on the Rights of the Child was being framed. It has been, through research and through biology, it has been determined that persons under the age of 18 are not able to make decisions as persons over the age of 18. So it's a maturity issue. And so in order to protect this group of children, we put the cap at 18 just to ensure that those who are below this age are able to experience certain protections and rights as well.
Yes, and I asked that question because it's so important. Many times we think children are just small children, and when we see teenagers who are still below the ages of 18, people think that, oh, they're wise enough to make decisions. So I'm glad that you were able to educate the public with that information. What are some warning signs that a child may be experiencing abuse?
There are many signs that persons could look for. I would say the first one is drastic changes in the child's behavior. So, for example, we find that in a lot of contexts, a child may be very withdrawn when before they used to be very outgoing. And conversely, a child who could have been quiet before starts to act out. So changes in behavior is one major something that somebody could look for. And also in terms of bedwetting, we find that a lot of children who experience abuse start to wet their beds. They could be showing signs of fear as well when around the person who would have abused them, because one of the things I brought out in my definition is that threats are also considered and linked with abuse. So let's say a perpetrator threatens a child, they could show a lot of fear when around that individual. And then there's some, unfortunately, cases where children resort to self-harm as a result of that abuse. But I should also mention that these are just some examples that I'm providing, but not because a child shows these signs, it means that they're necessarily a victim of abuse. So that's why it is very important that a child and the parent, they foster a good relationship among each other so that if something happens, the child feels comfortable coming forward and saying, okay, this person may have touched me, this person may have raped me. And then, of course, finding solutions and reporting the issues as well. So fostering a good relationship with the child is very important because a child may not necessarily show these symptoms, and they could be a victim. So it's important to have that open communication with the child so that they are comfortable speaking out about the abuse.
Yes, and those are some very important signs, because now when, let's say, our teachers or our duty bearers, witness these signs, they can try and intervene, even if it might not be that case, but something still might be underlying with that child that needs addressing. Why do children sometimes hesitate to report and speak up about the abuse?
I would say the number one reason is fear. The child could be afraid that they're going to get into trouble. The child could be afraid that, oh my gosh, I did something and it's my fault. And the child could also be afraid if the perpetrator would have threatened them.
Yes.
And I know, as I said before, sometimes perpetrators use the tactic of telling children, for example, if you talk about it, you're going to get in trouble. I'm going to harm you. I'm going to harm the rest of your family. So fear is, I would say, the number one factor. But in addition to fear, I think there are some cases in which the child may not necessarily know that they are being abused. So that lack of awareness as well causes the child to be vulnerable, and the child may not be able to speak out for that reason. In addition to that, there are some children who may not have that supportive network. So I think we take it for granted that the child could tell a teacher, the child could tell a parent, but there are some children who do not necessarily have that sort of relationship with an adult, and so they might keep that issue to themselves. Yes. There's some other children who feel embarrassed to speak about the issue. So there are so many reasons why a person may not necessarily come forward and say that they're abused. I should also mention it sometimes depends on the age and maturity of the child. So if you are dealing with somebody who is very young, they may not necessarily even be able to verbalize and say, oh, I have been abused. Yes. So that is a factor that we should consider. And of course, when dealing with some persons with disabilities, they may not be able to express and say, I have been abused. And so I think it comes back to the point of fostering a very good relationship with the child so that the child feels comfortable speaking up. And it is important as an adult that you observe your child. You would know what is normal and what is not normal. And not you only as a parent, as a teacher, as a coach, as a caregiver, as somebody who is in a place of worship with a child. Take the time to observe children, spend time with them so that if something is wrong, don't wait for the child to come and tell you. You should be able to pick up that something is wrong and then have that conversation with the child.
Yes. To add to that, in the context of the Caribbean, especially Guyana, as we know, culture could also play a major role in children not wanting to, disclose what happened to them. Because let's say, for example, it's a mother and she has a partner that touches the child, but the partner is the caregiver. She might be hesitant to believe the child. How would you be able to dispel that myth?
One of the things that we have seen in Guyana, as you said, and in the rest of the Caribbean, is the thought that only some persons could abuse a child. Yes. So we tend to think maybe the father or even stranger danger, somebody who the child may not necessarily know. Yes. But one of the things that we want to emphasize in this podcast, I believe, is that anyone could abuse a child. And oftentimes the abusers are very close to the child. It could be a parent, it could be a father, it could also be a mother. I know a lot of times we tend to focus on the men, but women could also abuse children and those close to the child. So it is important that regardless of whether or not the child knows the person or does not know the person, the child is at risk to abuse in certain contexts. So when the child says, oh, my father abused me or my mother abused me, that report should be taken seriously and reported immediately.
Yes. Thank you for educating again the public about that. Why is it critical that children feel safe to report abuse and be taken seriously?
That's a very important question. If we think of the alternative, if children do not feel safe, what is going to happen? The abuse is going to continue. So it is necessary that we foster an environment where children feel comfortable reporting abuse, because if the child does not feel safe, the abuse is going to continue, the trauma is going to continue, the harms are going to continue. And I would also say that the perpetrator is going to feel emboldened that, okay, I could continue doing this thing and nothing's going to happen to me. So, and I see a theme running through our discussions. It's important to foster a very good relationship with that child so that regardless of who would have abused them, if it's a parent, they should feel comfortable speaking with a teacher, comfortable speaking with somebody from a place of worship. So that environment is very important for the child to feel comfortable to speak up about the abuse.
Yes, and when they do speak up, what other ways could the teacher or whomever support? Because many times when you speak up, sometimes the case runs dry, there's no follow up. So why is support important even after they speak up?
Support is important because, of course, we want to ensure that the child gets justice.
Yes.
So when the child speaks up, it is important that a parent or guardian takes the report seriously and reports the matter immediately to the nearest police station or even calling 911, and also reporting the matter to the Child Care and Protection Agency. I should also mention that in terms of speaking up, if a child comes to you and tells you that they're abused, the first thing that you should do is to take their concern seriously, not lash out at the child, not tell the child that they're lying. It is important to take whatever they're telling you seriously, and even congratulating the child, because if a child comes and tells you, "Oh, I'm being abused," that is not an easy conversation to have. So listen to them, be serious, and also report it to the relevant authorities, here being the police and also the Child Care and Protection Agency.
Yes, what stood out when you said listening? It makes me remember the victim blaming culture. How is that harmful to a child that speaks out?
It is very harmful because if somebody comes to you in a very traumatic circumstance like that and tells you that they're abused, and then you tell them, "Oh, you're lying, I don't believe you," it could result in the abuse continuing and the trauma continuing. And of course, the perpetrator having that leeway with the child, to do whatever. And the child, as I was even thinking about this whole interview, I know of many cases where children would have been abused as a child, and that trauma continues until adulthood. There's so many persons that are still grappling with abuse. So as soon as a child comes to you and reports that they are being abused, it is necessary that you take the concern seriously, you report it, and that you also provide whatever support is necessary for the child in terms of recovery.
So in a nutshell, what you said was that their response to a child disclosing about their abuse can shape the future of that child, and how they react or respond to their trauma. Right? How should systems respond in a way that protects the children's dignity and promotes recovery? I know, like UNICEF, the Rights of the Child Commission, Child Care and Protection Agency, even the school system and the home institution.
Similar to what was said just now, systems should ensure that whenever a child makes a report, that report is taken seriously. So it is up for the persons who are doing the investigations to gather whatever evidence is necessary, and also to act very promptly on the case, because we're dealing with a child in a very traumatic circumstance. I know sometimes we focus on the case management and not the child. It is important to focus on both the case and the child. So yes, act promptly, but also ensure that the child has access to necessary counseling and therapy. And as I said, sometimes the effects of the abuse continues for the rest of the child's life. It could also go into adulthood. So it's important to be patient with the child during this process and ensure that they get professional help and counseling. It might take days, weeks, months, years, but it's a process that needs to go through if the child is to be able to recover fully. So that long-term support is quite essential for the child.
Collective effort.
Collective effort.
So if a child is watching this and they want to, tell somebody, what course of action and what should the process look like? Because sometimes we enter the system and we don't know who we should speak to, what's the next step. So let's say a child, discloses to a teacher and the teacher is watching this. What should follow after that? And how are children, or who's responsible, as you mentioned, for protecting that child's well-being?
If a child reports to you, it could be a teacher, it could be a parent, it could be a coach, anybody, take that report seriously and then report the matter immediately to the police. It could be the nearest police station. You could call 911. You could also, and you should also report the matter to the Child Care and Protection Agency so that investigations should begin immediately. So report. I know sometimes if a child comes to you and you are close to the child, you might want to take matters into your hands. It is important that you go to the necessary authorities, here being the police and the Child Care and Protection Agency, and allow them to follow up the case.
Okay. What role do communities play in preventing abuse and protecting children?
Communities play a very important role. I know that in our context in Guyana and even in the rest of the world, we tend to use the statement, It takes a village to raise a child. I would also say it takes a village and community to protect a child. So whether the child is at home, whether the child is at school, in the community, places of worship, online, wherever the child is, it is necessary that adults, anybody who is in that sphere of influence, that we become the ears and eyes of the child, looking out for the child. If you see something that concerns you, you may not necessarily know whether or not the child is a victim of abuse, but report any concerns to the police or to the Child Care and Protection Agency. One of the things I want to emphasize is that each and every person has a role to play. I know sometimes in traditional context, you may say, this is my child, that my child is my responsibility, but every child should be your responsibility. Mm-hmm. So if you see something that is a source of concern to you, report it and allow the authorities to do their investigations.
Okay, thank you very much for that. The Rights of the Child Commission is a constitutional body responsible for oversight. Mm-hmm. So why do you think it's important that they oversee the functions mm-hmm. of, let's say, these other agencies that are responsible for protecting the rights of children? Why do you think it's important for there to be a body looking over to ensure that justice is sought through?
That's a very important question, and it brings out the question of accountability. Yes. Accountability is very important, and it is necessary to have these third-party agencies mm-hmm. to be I would say, the watchmen on the wall, yes. holding agencies accountable, because without essential agencies, I would believe, like the Rights of the Child Commission, mm-hmm. Anything could happen. So it is important that the Rights of the Child Commission and other agencies ask the questions, do the investigations, do the follow-up, to ensure that all systems are working, and just to ensure that there are no gaps that exist regarding the protection and safeguarding of children.
Yes, thank you. And for the viewers watching, whether it's a child, whether it's a parent, the community, or duty bearers, what message would you like to leave them in regards to child sexual abuse and awareness?
I would say that each and every person has a role to play. If a child comes forward and indicates that they were abused, take their concerns seriously and report the matter immediately to the police or to the Child Care and Protection Agency. Each and every person has a role to play, and it is necessary in order to ensure the protection of children that everybody plays their part.
Thank you, viewers. Again, this was our podcast brought to you by the Rights of the Child Commission and UNICEF. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for our next podcast.